The human colony on Varan 7 was a place of strict rules and silent tensions. Humans and aliens lived together under a fragile peace, but that peace had limits. The HFY were strong, fast, and proud. They believed in their superiority, convinced that humans were weak creatures who relied too much on their rules and technology. Zira, a young HFY with sharp amber eyes and restless energy, shared this belief. She had grown up hearing stories about how her people were meant to rule, how humans were only guests on this world. But stories were just words. Zira wanted proof. She wanted to see for herself if humans were as powerless as the elders claimed. And tonight, she would test them. The air was crisp as night settled over the colony. The human sector was quiet, lit only by the soft blue glow of security lights. Zira moved like a shadow, slipping between buildings, her movements quick and silent. The humans thought their security was perfect. They placed their trust in cameras, passcodes, and guards who barely paid attention. But they didn't realize how easy it was to watch, to learn, to wait for the right moment. And Zira had waited long enough. She crouched near the storage facility, her pulse steady. She had watched humans enter this place many times, memorized the codes they used, the way their fingers moved over the panel. They thought they were careful, but they weren't careful enough. She reached out, pressing the sequence she had seen earlier that day. For a second, nothing happened. Then, with a faint beep, the lock released. A smirk played on Zira's lips. Too easy. Inside, the storage room was lined with metallic crates, each labeled in human script. She moved quickly, her sharp eyes scanning the words. Medical supplies, food rations, construction tools. Nothing interesting. But then, near the back, she saw it. A small black case, separate from the others, locked and sealed. Something about it felt different. She stepped closer, reaching out, and the moment her fingers brushed against the metal, she felt a faint vibration beneath her skin. This wasn't an ordinary human tool. This was something more. Excitement flickered in her chest. Humans guarded their technology carefully, always whispering about their so-called dangerous inventions. What were they hiding? She gripped the case tightly, ready to leave. But before she could take another step, a voice broke through the silence. Step away from the storage unit. Zira's body tensed. The voice was deep, calm, unshaken. Slowly, she turned her head toward the doorway. A human stood there, his stance firm, his eyes cold and unreadable. Captain Reynolds. She knew him by reputation. Unlike most humans, he never looked afraid. He never backed down, even when standing before a HFY twice his size. His presence alone made other humans fall in line. He was their enforcer, their protector. Zira's grip on the case tightened, but she forced a smirk. I was just looking, she said, her tone playful. Reynolds didn't move. Put it down. Zira tilted her head. She expected him to raise his weapon, to call for backup. But he didn't. He simply watched her, his gaze steady, as if he was waiting for something. She chuckled. And if I don't? For a moment, neither of them spoke. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the security lights. Zira expected a threat, maybe an order. Instead, Reynolds took a slow step forward. I know your kind thinks we're weak, he said, his voice even. That we hide behind laws and rules because we can't handle real power. But you're wrong. Zira narrowed her eyes. Am I? Reynolds didn't blink. You think breaking rules makes you strong. It doesn't. Real strength is knowing when to act, when to hold back, when to strike. Zira scoffed. Sounds like fear to me. A slow breath left Reynolds' lips. Take the case then. Walk out of here. But remember this. I won't warn you twice. She hesitated, just for a second. He was letting her go. No guards, no alarms, no punishment. She had expected more of a fight, more resistance. Instead, this human was standing there, telling her to go. It almost felt like a trap. But she ignored the feeling. Humans were soft. That was their weakness. She stepped past Reynolds, still gripping the case. "Humans are too careful," she muttered. "That's why it'll always be weaker than us." She expected him to react, to get angry. But he only watched her, his face unreadable. His silence followed her all the way out of the storage facility, lingering in her thoughts longer than she wanted to admit. Back in her quarters, Syra sat on the floor, staring at the black case. The hum beneath her fingertips felt stronger now, almost alive. Whatever was inside, it wasn't normal. What were the humans hiding? Were they scared someone might steal it? Or was it something even they didn't fully understand? Her fingers traced the edges of the lock. A small voice in the back of her mind whispered that maybe Reynolds hadn't stopped her because he didn't care. Maybe he had let her go because he knew something she didn't. But Syra pushed the thought away. Humans weren't that clever. If they were, they wouldn't have let her walk away with their secret. With careful hands, she pressed the release mechanism on the side of the case. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a faint hiss, the lock disengaged. The lid lifted slightly, a thin red glow spilling out. Syra's smirk faded. The hum beneath her fingertips turned into a soft pulse, like a heartbeat. Her chest tightened. She had expected stolen data, maybe a prototype weapon. But this was different. The glow grew brighter, casting long shadows on the walls. Her fingers trembled slightly as she lifted the lid further. The air around her changed, heavy with something she couldn't explain. It wasn't just a machine. It wasn't just technology. It was something more. She had thought she was stealing the human secret. But now, as the red light flickered and pulsed like something alive, she realized something else. Maybe this wasn't a secret the humans were hiding. Maybe it was a danger they had locked away. And now she had set it free. The security alarms never went off. No guards came running. No soldiers burst into her room to take back what she had stolen. The human captain had let her walk away. And now Syra sat alone in her quarters, staring at the black case that hummed softly under her fingertips. The red glow inside pulsed like a heartbeat, slow and steady. It was strange, almost hypnotic. This was no ordinary human tool. It felt alive. A part of her wanted to close the case and forget about it. But Syra was not like the others in her clan. She wasn't afraid of humans. She wasn't afraid of their machines. If this was something important enough to be locked away, then it was something worth having. Carefully, she lifted the lid. The moment the case was fully open, the hum grew louder. A small metallic device sat inside, no bigger than her palm, with smooth silver edges and strange markings carved along its surface. Human language, but unfamiliar. It wasn't a weapon, at least not one she recognized. It didn't have buttons or a screen, but the air around it felt different, heavier somehow. She reached out to touch it. The instant her fingers made contact, a sharp jolt ran through her body. It wasn't pain, but it was powerful, like a surge of energy flowing into her veins. Syra gasped, pulling her hand back, her heart pounding. The red glow flared brighter for a second, then faded to a slow, steady pulse. Her breathing was uneven, her muscles tense. Whatever this thing was, it was not meant to be touched. She clenched her fists, shaking off the strange feeling. Humans were weak. If they had locked this thing away, it was probably because they were too afraid to use it. But Syra was not weak. She wouldn't fear something just because it was unknown. She had already taken it. There was no turning back now. A knock at her door made her freeze. It was firm, controlled. Not an alarmed guard, not an angry auxiliary elder. Only one kind of person knocked like that. Captain Reynolds. Syra's mind raced. Had he changed his mind? Was he here to take the case back? No. If he wanted to arrest her, he would have brought soldiers. He was alone. That meant he wanted something else. She took a deep breath, pushing the case under her bed before standing up and unlocking the door. Reynolds stood there, calm as ever, his sharp blue eyes studying her. For a human, he had an unnerving presence. He didn't show fear. He didn't show anger. He only watched. "I assume you've already opened it," he said. Zira crossed her arms. "If you didn't want me to, you should have stopped me." Reynolds gave a slow nod. "Maybe." He glanced past her, his gaze sweeping over the room before settling back on her. "Did you feel it?" She hesitated. "Feel what?" "The energy," he said. "The pulse. The warning." Zira forced a smirk. "Is that what humans call it? A warning?" Reynolds didn't react. He simply stepped inside, uninvited but unchallenged. He wasn't afraid of her, and that irritated her more than it should have. "You don't even know what you took," he said, his tone quiet but firm. "You think this is just human tech, that we were hiding it because we were scared. But you're wrong." Zira rolled her eyes. "Let me guess. It's dangerous. It's forbidden." "I've heard this before, Captain." Reynolds didn't smile. "Then listen carefully, because this time it's different." He stepped closer, his voice lowering. "That device isn't human. We didn't make it." Zira's smirk vanished. Reynolds kept his eyes locked on hers. "You want to know why I let you take it? Because I wanted to see what would happen. If it rejected you. If it reacted." His expression darkened. "And it did, didn't it?" Zira said nothing. He exhaled slowly. "That case was sealed for a reason. Not because we were afraid to use it, but because we couldn't. That thing was found on a dead planet, inside a ship that wasn't ours. The last person who touched it," he paused, watching her reaction, "didn't survive." Her chest tightened, but she refused to let him see her uncertainty. "I'm still standing," she said. "For now," Reynolds replied. "But you don't understand what you're dealing with. That device doesn't belong to humans. It doesn't belong to the Xelari either. It belongs to something else." A faint ringing sound filled the air. At first, Zira thought it was in her head, but when she glanced at Reynolds, she saw his jaw tighten. He heard it too. The device. The red glow was no longer steady. It was pulsing faster, the hum growing louder, like a heartbeat that had just been awakened. Reynolds didn't hesitate. He grabbed Zira's wrist, his grip firm. "We need to move. Now." Zira pulled back. "I'm not going anywhere." He looked her in the eyes, and for the first time, she saw something different. Not fear, not anger. Urgency. "This isn't just about you anymore," he said. "You might have just woken something up." And then, before she could argue, the lights in her room flickered. The air grew colder. The case beneath her bed rattled, as if something inside was trying to escape. The last thing she heard before the entire colony shook was Reynolds muttering under his breath, "Too late." Zira had been in battles before. She had faced storms, enemies, and dangers that would have sent weaker beings running. But nothing felt like this. The walls trembled around her, the lights flickering in uneven bursts. The air itself felt strange, charged with something unseen. A deep, unnatural hum filled the room, rising from beneath her bed. The case, the thing inside it wasn't just glowing anymore. It was waking up. Reynolds didn't waste time. He grabbed Zira's arm again, his grip stronger now. "Move," he ordered, his voice sharp. Zira pulled back, her eyes flashing with defiance. "You think I'm afraid of a little shaking?" But even as she said it, she felt a strange pressure pushing against her chest. Something wrong in the air around them. It wasn't an attack. It wasn't a weapon. It was something deeper, something older than either of them. And for the first time, she wasn't sure if she could fight it. Reynolds didn't argue. He reached under her bed and slammed the case shut. The red glow dimmed slightly, but the humming didn't stop. The colony trembled again, and this time, it wasn't just the walls. Outside, an alarm blared through the settlement. Shouting voices, hurried footsteps. Something was happening, and it was happening fast. Zira clenched her jaw. What did you bring into my room? Reynolds gave her a sharp look. You brought it here. Before she could respond, a loud boom shook the entire building. The floor beneath them lurched, and Zaira barely kept her balance. Reynolds steadied himself against the wall, his expression dark. Then, the worst sound of all. Silence. The alarms outside cut off. The voices stopped. Even the faint humming from the security systems went dead. The only thing left was the low, eerie pulsing from the case, like the heartbeat of something waiting, watching. Zaira's instincts screamed at her. Something wasn't right. She reached for the wall panel, tapping the emergency override. Nothing. The power was gone. Reynolds exhaled slowly. We need to get to the command center. Now. Zaira hesitated. She wasn't used to following human orders, but something in Reynolds' eyes told her this wasn't about orders anymore. It was about survival. With a sharp nod, she grabbed the case and secured it against her side. If this thing was causing the blackout, she needed to keep it close. She wasn't going to let the humans lock it away again without answers. They moved quickly through the halls, stepping over debris that had fallen from the shaking. The corridors were dark, the only light coming from the emergency beacons along the floor. Zaira's sharp eyes adjusted fast, but she could tell the humans were struggling. Then she noticed something else. The colony was too quiet, too empty. She expected guards, engineers, anyone rushing to fix the power, but there was no one. Reynolds slowed beside her, scanning the darkness. Where is everyone? Zaira felt a chill she couldn't explain. Gone. The word hung between them, heavy and uncertain. Then footsteps echoed from ahead. Fast, unsteady. Someone was coming. Zaira tensed, ready for a fight, but when the figure stumbled into view, her stance faltered. It was a human officer. His uniform was torn, his face pale with fear. He looked at them, but didn't see them. His eyes were wide, wild, and he was mumbling something under his breath. The voice, he whispered. It's here. It's awake. Reynolds stepped forward. What happened? The officer flinched, shaking his head. The others, they're gone. They heard it, and then they were just gone. Zaira felt a knot tighten in her stomach. Gone where? The officer's breath hitched. His hands trembled. Not where. He swallowed hard. What? A low, unnatural whisper slid through the air, brushing against their ears like something unseen had just exhaled. Reynolds moved first. Move. Zaira didn't argue this time. She grabbed the officer by the arm, dragging him forward as they ran. The hall stretched ahead of them. Too dark, too quiet, too wrong. Then, a shadow shifted in the distance. It wasn't a person. It wasn't a machine. It wasn't supposed to be there. And it was watching them. Zaira's grip tightened on the case. Whatever she had stolen, whatever she had touched, it had just noticed her. And now, it was coming. Zaira didn't know what she was looking at. The shadow in the distance wasn't moving like a person. It wasn't walking, wasn't running. It was shifting, stretching, almost like smoke, but too solid, too heavy in the air. And worse, it was getting closer. The officer in her grip trembled. We can't outrun it, he whispered, his breath shaky. Zaira clenched her jaw. She wasn't the kind to run from a fight. But this wasn't a fight. This was something else. Something wrong. Reynolds grabbed her arm. Command center. Now. She didn't argue. Together, they ran, the officer stumbling beside them. Zaira kept the case clutched tight against her chest, but the pulsing inside was stronger now, faster, like a heartbeat racing in fear. The whispering followed them. At first, it was soft, just a sound in the air. But as they ran, it grew sharper, deeper, crawling under Zaira's skin like cold fingers brushing her spine. She couldn't understand the words. She didn't want to. They turned a corner, and the command center door came into view. Sealed shut. Open it, Reynolds barked. already reaching for the emergency override panel. Zira moved fast, pressing her palm against the scanner. Nothing. No power, she swore under her breath. The officer whimpered, his head snapping toward the hall behind them. It's coming. Reynolds slammed his fist against the panel, his voice tight with urgency. Backup power should have kicked in by now. Zira wasn't listening. She turned, heart pounding. The hall was empty. No shifting shadow, no movement. But she knew better. It was there. Watching. Waiting. She exhaled sharply and yanked the case open. The glow inside was no longer pulsing. It was flaring, reacting to whatever was coming. She didn't know what she expected, but suddenly, the markings on the device shifted, rearranging before her eyes. A new symbol appeared, brighter than the rest. Reynolds noticed. What did you do? I don't know. Zira hesitated, then reached for the device. The moment her fingers touched it, the entire colony shook. A deep, inhuman noise echoed through the halls. Not a voice, not a machine. Something ancient, something vast. The shadow behind them twisted, as if in pain. And then the command center door unlocked. Reynolds didn't wait. He grabbed the officer and shoved him inside before turning back to Zira. Move. Zira snapped the case shut and ran in after them, the heavy metal doors sliding closed just as the whispering turned into a scream. Darkness. Then, emergency lights flickered on. The command center was empty, abandoned. Chairs overturned, screens dark. But it was safe. For now. Reynolds was already at the controls, checking systems, his expression unreadable. Power's still out everywhere except here. But the scanners. His voice trailed off, and his fingers tightened around the console. Zira stepped closer. What? He turned the screen toward her. The display flickered, static dancing across it, but one thing was clear. A distorted shape hovered just outside the room. It wasn't a person. It wasn't an alien. It was something else. And it wasn't alone. Zira's breath caught. How many? Reynolds' face was grim. Too many. The officer let out a shaky sob. They're inside the colony. Zira gritted her teeth. Then we fight. Reynolds exhaled. We don't even know what they are. Zira glanced at the case in her hands, then back at the screen. Somehow, this device was the key, and she had already opened the door. The command center felt too small, too quiet. Outside, in the dark corridors of the colony, something waited. Zira could feel it, like a weight pressing against her chest. The screen in front of her still flickered with static, but the blurry shapes were clear enough. They weren't alone. Reynolds was already scanning the systems, his fingers moving fast over the controls. The officer sat in the corner, breathing hard, eyes darting around like he expected the shadows to reach in and pull him away. Zira ignored them both. Her focus was on the case. The device inside still pulsed, its glow slow and steady, almost like it was breathing. Whatever it was, whatever power it held, it had reacted when she touched it, and it had hurt whatever was outside. She hesitated. She wasn't a scientist. She wasn't even an engineer. She was a warrior, trained to fight, trained to win. But this wasn't a normal fight. Reynolds looked up. We need answers. Now. Zira met his gaze. What are they? Reynolds exhaled slowly, shaking his head. Not human. Not Celari. Maybe not even from our galaxy. He turned the screen toward her again. The static cleared for a moment, and she caught a better look at the shapes outside. Tall, twisted, no clear form. Just shifting darkness moving like liquid, stretching unnaturally. And the worst part, they weren't walking. They were gliding. Silent, watching, waiting. Reynolds clenched his jaw. They've been here longer than we have. We just didn't see them. Zira frowned. That's impossible. The officer let out a nervous laugh, then explained how they're already inside. How they got past the security grid, the motion detectors, His voice broke. No one had an answer. Zyra's grip tightened on the case. Maybe they weren't outside the colony. She looked at Reynolds. Maybe they were already inside. The silence that followed was worse than the whispers. Reynolds turned back to the screen. If that's true, then we need to get out of here. Now. Zyra took a slow breath. Not yet. Reynolds narrowed his eyes. What do you mean, not yet? She knelt, unfastening the locks on the case again. The glow inside flared slightly, reacting to her touch. Reynolds stiffened. Zyra, I need to know, she said. He didn't stop her. She reached inside. The second her fingers brushed the metal surface, the colony screamed. Not the people, not the alarms. The walls, the lights flickered, the air hummed, and outside the command center, the dark shapes lurched as if something had yanked them back. Zyra's head snapped up. Did you see that? Reynolds nodded. It reacted to you. She looked down at the device in her hands. The markings on its surface shifted again, revealing new symbols, new patterns. It wasn't just energy. It was language. A message. Zyra's heart pounded. This isn't just a weapon. She swallowed hard. It's a warning. Reynolds exhaled. From who? Before she could answer, the officer let out a strangled cry. They turned just in time to see the shadows slipping through the cracks in the walls. They were here, and they were no longer waiting. The air inside the command center changed. It grew heavier, colder, pressing against Sarah's skin like unseen hands reaching for her. The shadows slipping through the cracks weren't moving fast. They didn't need to. They knew they had already won. The officer stumbled back, shaking. They're inside. They're inside. His voice was barely more than a whisper, but the fear in his eyes said everything. Zyra stood her ground. She had faced death before, had fought in battles that shook the stars. But this was something different. This was something wrong. Reynolds pulled his weapon, aiming at the darkness crawling across the floor. We don't even know if bullets work on them. Zyra clenched her jaw. Only one way to find out. She drew her own weapon, a sleek Silari pulse rifle, and fired. The energy blast hit the moving shadows, but instead of burning or blasting apart, it simply vanished into the darkness, like the creature had swallowed it whole. Reynolds cursed. That's not good. Zyra adjusted her grip on the case. The device inside still pulsed, but now, its light flickered like it was waiting for something. The symbols on its surface were changing faster, revealing new patterns, new shapes. A voice, not hers, whispered in her mind. The door has opened. Her breath caught. Did you hear that? Reynolds frowned. Hear what? Zyra hesitated. If he hadn't heard it, then that meant it was talking to her. The shadows lunged. Reynolds fired, dragging the officer with him as they moved back toward the console. The darkness shifted, stretching toward them, silent, hungry. Zyra could feel it reaching for her, not with hands, but with something deeper, something pulling at her mind. She tightened her grip on the device. Not today. Without thinking, she pressed her palm against the surface. The moment she did, everything changed. A pulse of blinding white light exploded from the device, slamming into the walls, the floor, the ceiling. The shadows reeled, twisting and shrieking in a sound that wasn't meant for human or Xilari ears. The officer collapsed, clutching his head in pain. Reynolds winced, barely managing to stay on his feet. But Zyra saw something else. For a split second, the darkness wasn't darkness anymore. It had form, had shape, a mass of twisting, shifting tendrils, eyes blinking in and out of existence, a being made of something beyond flesh, beyond energy, something ancient, something trapped. And now, because of her, it was free. The whisper returned, but this time, it wasn't inside her head. It was everywhere. You should not have opened the door. Zaira's blood ran cold. Reynolds grabbed her arm. We need to go. Now. The white light was fading. The shadows were already regrouping, shifting, learning. The next time, the device wouldn't save them. Zaira snapped the case shut and ran. The walls trembled. The floor beneath them cracked. The colony wasn't just under attack, it was coming apart. And outside, beyond the thick metal doors of the command center, something bigger was waiting. Something that had just woken up. Zaira ran. Reynolds was right behind her, dragging the officer forward as the ground beneath them cracked apart. The colony walls groaned, metal twisting as if something inside them was waking up. The whispering never stopped. It crawled under her skin, deep into her mind, pulling at her thoughts. You should not have opened the door. The words didn't come from one voice. They came from many, layered, shifting, impossible to track. It wasn't just speaking. It was remembering. Zaira clenched her jaw, gripping the case tighter. The device inside still pulsed, but weaker now, almost like it was dying. And she knew, if the light inside faded completely, they were finished. Ahead, the emergency evacuation hatch loomed. Keep moving, Reynolds shouted over the growing noise. The officer was barely holding himself together, his breath ragged, his steps uneven. But he ran, because stopping meant death. Or worse. Zaira reached the control panel first, slamming her hand against it. The hatch doors groaned, then jammed halfway. Come on, she muttered, trying again. Nothing. Behind them, the shadows reformed, stretching toward them. No shape, no face. Just shifting, liquid darkness that swallowed the walls, the floors, everything. Zaira's pulse raced. We don't have time for this. Reynolds glanced at the case in her hands. Use it. She hesitated. The device had hurt them before, but it wasn't a weapon. It was a warning. A key. But maybe it could also be a lock. The whispering grew louder. The shadows lunged. Zaira threw the case open and grabbed the device with both hands. It burned. Not with heat, but with something deeper, something that made her skin crawl, her thoughts blur. The symbols on its surface shifted rapidly, faster than before, forming a shape she almost recognized. And then, the world exploded. A shockwave of pure light erupted from the device, slamming into the walls, the ceiling, the floor. The colony screamed, metal twisting, panels shattering. And the shadows froze. For the first time, they weren't moving, weren't whispering. They were staring at her, and she finally understood. They weren't trying to kill her. They were trying to warn her. Because the real danger wasn't them. It was below. A deep rumbling shook the ground. Something massive, something ancient, was waking up beneath the colony. A force older than the station, older than the stars. The shadows were afraid. And now, so was she. Reynolds grabbed her. We have to go. Zaira didn't argue. The hatch doors, once jammed, suddenly released, sliding open with a deep hiss. The emergency tunnel stretched ahead, leading toward the surface, toward their only chance at escape. She ran. The officer scrambled through first, his panic giving him speed. Reynolds followed. Zaira was last, still gripping the device as she reached the end of the tunnel. She risked one last look back. The colony was collapsing, sinking into the depths. The shadows remained still, watching her, but they no longer chased. Because now, the real nightmare had begun. She understood the message now. The door has opened, and whatever had been waiting behind it was finally free. The ground gave way, swallowing the command center, the corridors, everything. Zaira didn't look back again. She just ran.